How are you feeling? How has this journey been?
Listen, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about the momentum that we are feeling in this race. We have been telling our story all across Georgia, and voters are responding. I'm running against the wealthiest member of Congress. Her family owns a company that owns the New York Stock Exchange. In spite of the millions of dollars that she spent buying this seat and trying to hold on to this seat, we're in the lead. We have a double-digit lead, and I think it's because voters are hearing somebody who cares about ordinary people, who understands that we have to make sure that we provide health care for all of Georgia's citizens, that we protect the dignity of our workers, particularly those who are on the front lines in the midst of this global pandemic. People are concerned about their health, the prosperity of their families, and their future. The stakes in this election could not be higher. I've spent my whole life committed to service. I'm a kid who grew up in public housing, one of 12 children in my family. I'm number 11 and the first college graduate. And now I'm the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, spiritual home of Martin Luther King Jr., and I'm running for the U.S. Senate. That means that the American dream is still very much alive. It's just slipping away from far too many people, and that's why I'm running for the U.S. Senate.
Reverend Warnock, I want to talk about health care for a minute. The state still has not expanded Medicaid. You were actually arrested over this. You've been arrested protesting the fact the state has not done this. God willing, if you become Senator of Georgia, what can you do? What can be done to make sure that this state, Georgia, expands Medicaid? Because I have friends who are in Georgia who've gotten the coronavirus. They're afraid. Rural hospitals being shut down all over Georgia. And you've been on the front lines protesting, but as an elected official, what can be done?
All of that is correct. Georgia is one of only 12 states that to this day has refused to expand Medicaid. You know, it's like paying your water bill and the mayor decides to turn the tap off anyhow. You know, Georgians have been paying the federal taxes just like everybody else, while our state leaders have refused to expand Medicaid. And what that means is we are subsidizing health care in New York and Illinois and California. Meanwhile, our hospitals, especially in rural Georgia, are closing. We've seen the closing of 7 hospitals in the last 10 years. 2 more have announced that they're closing. In fact, one closed yesterday. And I was down in Southwest Georgia, and the folks were very concerned about the closing of their hospital. And let me paint the picture for this. You know, we're saying if you expand Medicaid, a lot of these hospitals wouldn't be closing. And this impacts you whether you need Medicaid or not, because if the hospital in your area is closing and you're having a stroke, it doesn't matter that you have insurance if there's no hospital to get to. So this issue was already urgent. It's been made much more urgent, as you point out, by COVID-19. So it's something the state needs to do, but it is something that a United States senator committed to health care can help. I can help it become even more easy and attractive for Georgia to expand Medicaid. We ought to do it now, but there's certainly work I could do at the federal level to make sure that Georgia, for example, could come in and enjoy the same rates of support from the federal government as the states that got in early, where they had coverage for 100% for the first 3 years, and then 90% from then on. I'd like to see Georgia be able to come in, even though we're late, at that same level of support. And there's legislation that could be passed to make that happen. Look, I'm a pastor. This is not theoretical stuff for me. I stand at hospital bedsides. I've been in the waiting rooms of critical care units where loved ones have been concerned not only about the health of their family member in the next room, but struggling with how they're going to pay for it and whether this illness is going to change the whole financial outlook of their family. And so what I want to do is translate my years of pastoral care, support, and empathy for others into legislation.
I've been having this conversation this week. It's been popping up, certain stories in the news cycle, and it's folks saying that Democrats are struggling with conservative black voters because of 2 issues, abortion and same-sex marriage. As someone who is a pastor, What do you say to a black conservative who is thinking about voting Republican because of those two issues?
I would say that if you are really concerned about life, you certainly don't want to elect somebody who wants to get rid of health care in the middle of a pandemic. Like, these are not theoretical public policy discussions. People are dying, especially in the African American community. And the COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharp focus long-standing disparities in access to health care. Our folk are at the front lines. We're disproportionately represented among the frontline workers, which exposes us to the disease. And then you've got long-standing issues of comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, asthma. In fact, in some ways, if you're a woman, that's a pre-existing condition. And so I would implore folk who value human life to understand that health care is a human right. And it is certainly something that the richest nation in the world can and ought to provide for all of its citizens. After all, for those of us who are Christians, we know that Jesus spent a lot of time in those Gospels that I preach every week healing the sick, especially those with pre-existing conditions. Blind Bartimaeus had a pre-existing condition. Jesus healed him and never billed him for his services. And so for me, this is moral work. This is godly work. And you know what? It's enlightened self-interest. We should have known before this pandemic that we need our neighbor covered. But now that we're dealing with a deadly airborne disease, that means that when my neighbor coughs, I can get sick. My neighbor's wellness is connected inextricably to my well-being. I, out of enlightened self-interest, should want that person to be covered. And so I've been focused on health care for years, which is why I've gotten arrested, trying to get us to expand Medicaid in this state. And yes, I believe unequivocally in a woman's right to choose. I support reproductive justice. First of all, it's just a part of my overall commitment to comprehensive health care for women. I believe in human agency and freedom. And look, those who don't agree with me on this issue, here's a space where we can work together. The United States of America consistently has high rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality. That is, when you compare our rates of death of women and infants in and as a result of childbirth, we are consistently way higher than our other Western industrialized peers. And so that rate is especially high here in the South. What I'm saying is it's dangerous in many ways for women who are pregnant in Georgia. And the rates of maternal death for African American women all across the country are 3 to 4 times higher than their white sisters. And so anybody who is concerned about wellness and life and the affirmation thereof should join me in the fight against infant mortality and maternal mortality. This is a space and a place where government can actually make a difference. I think that a patient's room is a mighty cramped space for a woman, her doctor, and the U.S. government. But maternal death, infant death, these are places where public policy could make a difference. And I hope we be focused on that. On the LGBTQ plus community, I believe that there's no such thing as equal rights for some. Equal protection under the law is the covenant that we have with one another as an American people. And as someone who spent my life fighting for civil rights and human rights, I'll fight for it in the U.S. Senate. We need to pass the Equality Act and make sure that our sisters and brothers do not experience discrimination based on who they love.
In the name of Bayard Rustin, thank you. In the name.
That's a great name. Great name, great brother.
Of course, of course. So there has been this narrative out there, people saying that, well, a lot of pop stars, hip-hop stars have been saying that Democrats are ignoring black men. They're not speaking to black men enough. As a black man who's running in the Democratic Party, what are your thoughts when you hear that?
Well, I'm a black man, and I'm standing up for brothers. I think it's important for us to get engaged, stay engaged. Listen, democracy is not something you can outsource to others. We can't outsource it to our sisters, and we certainly can't outsource it to the politicians. We need black men to stand up. And as a brother, a graduate of Morehouse College, proud graduate of that place, I know what happens when black men stand up and make sure that they have skin in the game and they show up for the fight. We can do this. Look, our children, we see names on the ballot, and folks say, I'm not going to go vote for this person, that person is the lesser of two evils, blah, blah, blah. Listen, your children are on the ballot. Health care is on the ballot. The dignity of work, the ability to have a living wage is on the ballot. And criminal justice reform is on the ballot. The choice could not be more stark in this era in which we are witnessing the tragic killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, here in Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks, whose eulogy I preached. Black men are the face of one of the most pressing moral issues of our time, I would argue, and that is America's criminal justice system, the prison industrial complex. The United States of America is 4% of the world. We warehouse 25% of the world's prisoners. And this has been going on since about 1980. We've seen prison construction go up in our country, irrespective of crime rates. Crime rates could be going down, prison construction going up. Much of this is a result of the so-called war on drugs, which has really been a war on black and brown bodies. They've literally siphoned out black bodies, particularly men, over several decades. And I know people's concerns about this, and it's true. Republicans and Democrats have participated in the tragedy that I'm discussing. But the contrast could not be more stark. The people I'm running against and the current occupant of the White House, they're in deep denial that we have a problem at all. And we've got to stand up in a moment like this. I know this pain personally. I've got a brother. You know, I'm one of 12 children in my family. I had several brothers, 6 brothers. One is deceased. But I have a brother who went to prison for a nonviolent drug-related offense, first-time offender, veteran of the armed services. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for a crime in which no one got physically hurt, no one was killed, no one even got hot. Because the feds controlled the whole crime scenario that they created. And so I know this pain personally. I know it as a pastor. We've got to deal with this issue of police brutality, but police brutality is driven by this huge carceral state that we have built over the last 40 years. No other nation even comes close. And so we need black men and their voices in this conversation. We need you to show up to the polls, argue, fight with the politicians after the election day, election season. But to stay home is a serious abnegation of your responsibility. We need you to stand up in a moment like this.